Gordon Graham here. First and foremost, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend this webinar. I really hope the next hour of some value to you is of some value to you. Also, thank you for the good people at University of Virginia for putting this all together to make sure that you can get a message regarding technology. For those of you who I've never met, I spent 33 years with the California Highway Patrol. First 10 as a motorcycle cop, second 10 as a sergeant, supervised the motorcycle cops, and through a series of flukes, I got invited up to headquarters in 1992 and spent my remaining years there. My big claim to fame is I helped build the Office of General Counsel and the Office of Risk Management. Since 1977, I've been lecturing to public safety personnel from not just around America and Canada, but around the world. I am honored today to be a assistant professor at University of Virginia in their Master of Public Safety program. And I'll do a brief advertisement for that. A great program, not a program where you pay your fees and get your Bs, but a lot of work is involved. But if you graduate with that MPS degree, you'll be in great shape in your organization and really preparing for your future. Along with Michelle Wucker, the author of The Gray Rhino, I'm a team teacher with her in a elective program in the MPS program, Practical Applications of Risk Management and Public Safety Operations. And over an 8-week window, we cover what's known as the 10 families of risk. Long before I went to law school, my graduate work was in risk management, and we talk about the 10 families of risk. Now, where did that come from? As I started my lecture series back in the late 70s, early 80s, people were saying, Gordon, I like what you're saying, but there's so many risks we face. How do we get started? And I didn't have the answer. But in the mid 90s, it finally hit me. I've taken all the risks that you face in public safety, police and fire, corrections, all of those different agencies, and I put them into 10 families. The external risks, family one, family two, the legal and regulatory risks, family three, strategic risks, family four, organizational risks, family five, operational risks, family six, information risks, family seven, HR risks, family eight, technology risks, family nine, financial and reputational risks, and family 10, political risks. And we drill down on family eight on technology and technology risks. Now, I will tell you right up front, and for those of you who heard early, you heard this conversation among the panelists, including me, I am a tech idiot. I am a tech idiot, but I sure do appreciate technology. And what it's done for public safety over the last 100 years is absolutely amazing. When I came on, we studied the father of American policing, August Vollmer, and even he was talking about technology. And way back in the late 1800s, 1892, came up with fingerprint technology. And then in 1920, the Bertillon system using body measurements, a technology aid in identifying suspects. Early crime data systems in the 1930s. In the 60s, computer-aided dispatch. That was unheard of before that. APHIS in the 1980s. I can recall fingerprinting people back in the 70s and spending hours and hours trying to identify this person. And now we have APHIS. Predictive policing in the year 2000. And what are we working on today? On the law enforcement side of things, object detection, early intervention systems, robotic law enforcement, facial recognition, smarter situational awareness. On the fire side of things, digital alerts, CAD to CAD, where they can talk computer to computer, planning modules. When you show up at a building, you'll have a cloud that downloads everything about that given building. ASAP to PSAP, private alarm systems into the public safety dispatch centers, telematics. There is so much going on. And all of these technologies involve ethical risks, privacy risks, and implementation challenges. So I am honored to have three people with me today who are techies and they understand these things, and I'll act as the moderator. I'll have them introduce themselves, and then we'll move into a series of discussion points, and we'll wrap it up with some closing thoughts. But first, I see Art on the screen there. Art, can you give us a little bit of your background?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Nice to meet everyone, or afternoon now. My name is Art Thompson. I'm the Chief Information Officer here at the City of Detroit. Got my start in technology actually in emergency management, working for an ambulance company doing IT support and triaging, so doing all the fun that comes along with 911 response. Then migrated to the city in 2016, where I began my career off as the IT manager over mobility, so overseeing any type of public safety technology that essentially grew legs, right? Where it could be transferred, moved And that was my forte. So I spent my entire career in the public safety and government. And, today I sit as CIO for the city as well.
Well, congratulations on all you're doing, and thank you so much for being with us today. Scott Haug, please tell us about yourself.
Thank you. So honored to be with both of you. Gordon, it's great to again be with you today on this webinar. And Art and I work on another committee, and I'm so impressed with everything that Art does. So I feel like the bridesmaid here today. But my name's Scott Haug, 32 years in law enforcement, was the police chief in a small jurisdiction called Post Falls up in the Pacific Northwest, right next to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I'm a technologist. I love law enforcement technology, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation today.
And was Dale able to get on? Dale, are you there? Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, we had Dale Stockton was planned to be here, but he's got some tech difficulties today making a connection. Very briefly, Dale is a technologist also, former editor of lawofficer.com, a post consultant for decades, a member of the Post Commission, I'm sorry, a captain on Carlsbad PD in Southern California. And I'm sorry, Dale might be able to get on later on. But thank you, gentlemen. Art, I want to start with you, and then we'll move on to Dale with the same question. Public safety agencies today are often pitched the latest and greatest technologies. From your perspective, what are the biggest risks when agencies adopt technology without sufficient due diligence or proper planning? And my guess is you could talk a week about this, but if you can give us 5 or so minutes on what you've seen with what happens when you adopt things without really thinking them through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest challenges with technology is bad adoption usually leads to bad rollout of bad product. And when you look at public safety specifically, I think you're in an area where that trust in technology has to be there, has to exist. So I'll go on a small rant. You look at the city of Detroit, we were coming out of bankruptcy in 2012. And one of the biggest things that we actually were faced with during bankruptcy was a consent decree. And if everyone's not familiar with that, it's essentially a lot of oversight into your law enforcement. And, transparency became one of the biggest things that we wanted to focus on and we wanted to revitalize. So my first project here at the city of Detroit when I started was actually to roll out body cameras. And while it seems like, you just toss a body camera on an officer, send them out and life's good, we went with a little bit more of a sophisticated option where we had body cameras that were now integrating with vehicles, integrating with what we call triggers, which would be, you turn your lights on, you turn your sirens on. So all of those integrations now, you start to talk about the advancements in technology, and this creates loopholes, right? You go from great technology, awesome features, cool things, but when those features don't align with how people operate from a law enforcement perspective, if you're not using your lights every time you pull up to a call, now you're not recording. So how does that now mystify the trust and start to break down in that trust? So, you look at technology as being, how do we integrate it? How do you tie it together with your specific use case? How are you using technology to better your operation? It's not a one size fits all, which is, I think what a lot of people run around trying to tell people and sell people on is we've got, the best shiny thing to fit your need. And they say that to everyone. But when in reality, you look at public safety, everyone does it a little bit different, and it can be small things. You look at the city of Detroit, we run 2-man officers, meaning we have an officer in the front seat, passenger seat, for almost every single operation we do. That's not the normal out there. And so how do you integrate technology to make sure that it's now adaptable for 2 officers as opposed to one getting in and syncing their body camera, making sure that technology works? So you've got to look at the layers. How do you use your operational technology? How does it fit into your broader plan and perspective? And then you start to get in the back end, right? Because that's the easy part is how do you make technology adapt to your operation? The hard part now, and I think, technology is often overlooked, is how do you make it work in the background? So again, picking on that body camera example we had here at the city, we didn't have body cameras to that robustness. So how do you look at scaling? How do you look at the incremental cost that, and it can be small things such as storage, right? This is a lot of video now that you're storing in a police department. How do you scale that rapidly? How do you, set policy and retentions that align with what you need? And I think when you start to talk about public safety technology, all of those layers just continue to grow and get compounded when you start to layer them on top of each other. But then also you have to maintain that level of transparency. So I think, having good technology partners is key. having great technology leaders, is a must, but you also have to have that relationship with the department. And that's where I see a lot of people kind of go rogue and fail, is they don't integrate technology into the operation. And a lot of the times it's the leadership that's not sitting down, having those conversations and being open and transparent about the challenges with advancement.
Thanks, Art. Scott, you've listened to Art talk, and I'm sure you have some ideas also. Please go
You bet.
ahead.
Art has some great thoughts there. We implemented a lot of technology I was with the police department for 32 years. About 20 of that we were implementing technology. And I think one of the biggest things that I see as I consult with agencies across the country is many times we find a piece of technology and we go looking for a solution. And it should be the other way around. We should be, if we've got an issue, we should try to find a piece of technology to fix that. So a couple of thoughts. I have three different thoughts on this. Number one, make sure that what you're purchasing is not what I call vaporware. A lot of times these vendors will come in with a product and say that it's going to solve all of these issues for you. And you end up on what I call the bleeding edge instead of the cutting edge of technology. And that can be a real problem. As Art said, it can be a real problem with a waste of taxpayer dollars. And I'm always concerned that we shouldn't be buying anything that says version 1 on it. We should be making sure that we've checked with other agencies and that we're confident that this vendor is able to provide what we're looking to provide. I think the one of the most important things with any piece of technology is that we have proper policy and proper training out there. Art mentioned BWC, body worn cameras, and when we rolled out our body worn cameras in 2008, we were an early adopter. One of the things that we didn't do a good job of is rolling that out and communicating, number one, with our staff of what the expectations were going to be. We just thought, you know what, we're just going to put these cameras on the officers and it's going to record, what they're doing. We didn't do a good job of working with our partner agencies. So we would have our officers show up to a scene with the sheriff's department. They're wearing cameras. The sheriff's department didn't realize that our officers had cameras. And you can imagine some of the concerns that happen as things are said and the sheriff's deputies didn't realize that they were being recorded. And then thirdly, making sure that you're talking with your community partners as well. The public, talking with your local schools, the hospitals, those are some of the things that we missed out on early on as we implemented body-worn cameras. I think the other issue is making sure that you work on public trust, making sure that when you implement these technologies that you are educating the public about what you're doing. We've seen some real problems with projects like license plate recognition, where agencies will implement that technology, not do a good job of educating the public, and before you know it, there is a perception of agency surveillance on the community, and that's not how the program is intended to work, and that's not how it works. So I think education with the public is extremely important as well. So just in closing on that question, I would just say, I've seen time and time again where agencies don't plan well. They don't plan for privacy concerns. They don't plan for storage. They don't plan for how it impacts the officer on the street. And it results many times in more complexity and undermines the trust of the project. And I'm here to tell you, if you lose the trust of your officers on a certain piece of technology, or you lose the trust of the community, it's really difficult to get that back at a later time. So work on that first to try to get that trust of both the internal officers as well as the public as well.
Thanks, Scott. Let's stay on that question for a second. If there was ever an anthology of the history of the world from start to where it is currently, and you look at significant events, I think the invention of the video camera, which has had so much impact around the world, shining the light of truth on what's going on, where it's not a he said, she said, but here's these pictures of Tiananmen Square. Here's these assassinations here. I mean, the live footage, all the bodies. I think that was a significant development. And again, I'm the outside idiot on these issues with respect to public safety. But I see the same thing with the body-worn cameras. When it comes to public trust and transparency and what really happened, I am a huge fan of body-worn cameras. I can recall when convenience stores started getting cameras in the store, and the crooks were not stupid. The crooks in Los Angeles back then, they would easily knock over a 7-Eleven without the cameras, and the ones that had cameras, they wouldn't go in there. And so when body-worn cameras came out, I recognized it would be better for our public and better for our personnel. I think that people are less likely to assault officers when they know they're on camera. I think that officers are less likely to behave badly when they know they're on camera. So I'm a big fan of that. Is there another technology which is now being implemented with similar concerns that you have?
Gordon, I think I agree with you 100% on the body-worn cameras. I think they have been a huge change for us in law enforcement. When they first came out, officers didn't want anything to do with them. It was going to be Big Brother watching them. And law enforcement is not clean work a lot of times. A lot of times when you're out there in the field, things happen that just don't look good, and that's just the way it is. But what we're seeing now is law enforcement officers don't want to go out on the street without their body-worn camera. So we've seen a big shift in that. One thing I would caution as it comes to video, though, is that there is a perception that if an officer has a camera on, the camera sees everything that the officer sees, and there's going to be this quality, view of what happened on the street. It's going to tell everything. It doesn't. And the camera doesn't see what the officer sees. And so we as administrators need to make sure that we understand that just because the officer had a camera on mean that it documents everything that the officer saw. There are a lot of times where body-worn camera videos are released and it tells one story, and when you do the investigation, it is a little bit different than what exactly the camera saw. So I think that's a critical piece of it, is that the camera is a great tool, but it does have a lot of limitations. To your point, the other piece of technology that I think has been a game changer is license plate recognition. That's been a wonderful tool. We implemented it in our agency, and we solved a lot of crimes that I don't believe would have been solved without that technology. And again, that's been a game changer for law enforcement.
Scott, I talked to my friends from the UK, and they tell me about the circle of LPR license plate recognition into the greater London area. And there are so many hits that they actually have to prioritize the hits. Oh, this is just a stolen car. This one's been involved in terrorist activities. This one possibly has a bomb. So you have to prioritize these things. Amazing how much that stuff will turn over. Any thoughts on other things besides LPR and BWCs?
LPRs was my favorite. But yeah, you know what? I'm going to go a little bit backwards and actually say cell phones. And here's why. You look at how agencies police today. We see New York do it. We're starting to see, Chicago, a lot of cities do it, where every officer is now getting a cell phone. And that's very basic, right? It's something that we all on this call, I would guarantee have. If not, Gordon, I'll buy you lunch. But you look at the ability to put information in people's hands, in officers' hands, from a scene safety perspective, from a incident response, from just being able to have data at your fingertips. And, having a computer in the car has always been that way. And I think that that's going to be something that will continue for a long time. But there's a lot of great innovations around putting information in officers' hands that, it's been out there for a long time, but we haven't hit that pinnacle point yet where it's perfected and it's robust, and there's this awesome one-in solution that has everything. You look at cell phones specifically, and what Samsung is doing with DeX, and if you're not familiar with DeX, it's literally you take your phone, you place it into a dock, and now you can display that on a large screen and almost have like a Chrome experience. Well, imagine not having to have a laptop in every car. And I know Chicago's testing this right now. You have now your CAD, your computer-aided dispatch, on your cell phone. You're able to dock that, make that display larger, see information, do BOLOs, which is, be on the lookouts, do anything now that you would on a computer, on a phone that is now modular. It's mobile. You can take it out, you can dock it. I think, we're in this situation where we're going to see limitless potential with what we can do with applications and cell phones. And so I think we're starting to get there. But I think, the next 5 years is going to be pretty exciting to see what we do with them and how we protect that and do more with that to increase officer knowledge as they're en route to scenes in different circumstances. And I'll give one last plug to drones. I think just having eyes again, the common theme here is awareness and having eyes on incidents. And I think drones is going to be that next big thing as well. That's going to help propel agencies to have data, site information faster than ever.
Well, you gentlemen probably don't know this, but I helped Samsung develop that whole system behind the scenes. I try to keep it secret. That was a joke. When you mentioned the drones as first responders and the uncrewed aerial systems and all those aviation things, that is another game changer, as you indicated. I look at fire service agencies. When you look at the liability that fire service organizations face, a lot of it gets down to vehicle operations. Wouldn't it be nice to send a drone at 100 miles an hour to a scene and film it where that feed would come right into the fire apparatus and they could slow down if there was no smoke or no visible this. There are so many things we can do with this. That I don't understand the technologies, but I am a huge fan of that stuff. And when it comes to officer safety, firefighter safety, that is a game changer indeed. Let's move on to the next question here. When leaders make technology decisions, how can they better incorporate consequence analysis, giving thought to short term, long term, intended, and my favorite topic to talk about, unintended consequences? Unintended consequences. So you're thinking about a new piece of technology. How do you analyze the consequences on this? Art, I'll start with you on this one, please.
Well, I think there's a level of transparency, and Scott touched on it as well, that really helps, right? There's when I started and joined kind of our police force from a technical perspective, I'm not a sworn member, but there was very much of a culture, and sorry to pick on police for a minute, us versus them mentality, right? We would go out there in the field, they'd come back, and you'd have an IT person tell you, oh, do it this way, and officers would push back. That's not real life. That's not how it's done. That's not how we interact. And instead of embracing kind of that collaboration, there was a lot of pushback. Officers knew how to do things, they knew what to do, and a little bit of resistance to the tech side. But what I think is you implement more and more technology, the more voices, the better. We do here in Detroit, we have a board of police commissioners where we hold public hearings to talk about the new technology, allow residents to ask questions. So not only are we increasing transparency, but we're getting views on situations and the technology we're deploying, and having open conversations so that we're better equipped to deal with some of these challenges. And I think from a technology standpoint, it's huge, right? Because as you interact with police or public safety responders in general, the citizen viewpoint is always a little bit different, right, than intended. So getting people in earlier, opening communication, having that dialogue externally, it can be very big and very rewarding. It'll prepare you for things that you're not thinking about. But I think as internal, we have to have that collaboration between the civilian side, the tech, and the police side, bringing both to the table and having that collaboration early on, making sure that technology has a seat at the table when you start to have these conversations. That's how you drop a lot of these things that people are not thinking about. They don't know to expect it. And so I will say that earlier transparency, that earlier collaboration is one of the biggest things that I've seen in the success that Detroit specifically has had. But I think around the nation, we're seeing this with crime analysts and just all over. The earlier you bring in these civilians as part of the operation and decision making, the more collaborative and the better outcomes that I think we're seeing.
Art, with respect to that technology you mentioned, did your police union have any concerns with that? Did management work with the union in advance, or is it a friendly relationship? I don't want to put Detroit on the spot, but a lot of times there's an adversarial relationship. How do they introduce that to the union?
Yeah, you nailed it earlier, actually, talking about the faith that police officers have in technology being so critical. Yes, after we did kind of the internal review, we brought in the union to talk about some of those configurations, specifically, speaking of body cameras. There's a lot of ability to turn on body cameras, while you're wearing them, if they're on what you would call record after the fact. Whereas if you didn't activate it, you could have a buffer. You could go back 5 minutes and view everything because that cameras are on. You can live stream. So we sat down and started to have conversations with the union early on to talk about the configuration piece, right? We wanted to make sure that they were comfortable, they understood, invasion of privacy, all that good stuff. We brought the union to the table early, and it's something where again, you start talking about record after the fact is so critical because you can have instances where you miss something and it's not nefarious. You just forgot to turn on your body camera, for example. Having the union have your back and say, we don't want that feature turned on. Well, now when we have to hold people responsible, the union was part of that, right? So I think that early development with the union specifically helped buy-in from the officer standpoint. They knew the union had their best interest. They knew Detroit Police Department had their best interest. So I think the union is a huge call out and good spot on there to bring into that conversation when you start talking about rolling out technology that is going to essentially surveil officers as well.
Thanks, Art. Scott, any thoughts?
Gordon, we've got Dale on now. I'd be interested in his thoughts on this too. Dale, are you there?
I'm able to join with audio only. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So Gordon, I'll actually give you two agency briefs since I'm not on camera. You know, when Chula Vista pioneered the use of drones, Chief Kennedy was ultra careful to make sure every side of this was involved to get their input. She had citizen panels, she had the police association, of course, the users in the police department, and even to this day, the people down there, they've become the poster child, if you will, for using drones in very effective ways. They're not into the run mode yet. They're just walking, and they caution other agencies to go slow because this is new. You've got the FAA involved, and if they screw it up, they know that they're going to affect agencies around the country in being sanctioned and not having the capabilities they need. So part of the concern is when you get a new technology, you've got to make sure you don't get ahead of yourself. And I'm really hopeful in that regard that agencies will be mindful of the way they're using drones so we don't get sanctioned rather than empowered. And then to the northwest, to Snohomish County, when then Under Sheriff Rob Byler rolled out telematics, he had 8 bargaining units to deal with, 6 of whom operated vehicles. And one of the things he did was put the emphasis on not discipline, but deputy safety. And when bargaining units push back and say, we don't want this technology, if it's a technology that's actually going to make the officers or the deputies safer, just go to those bylaws of the labor group, and you'll see right there at the top, for the health and welfare of our members. And that often overcomes. The caveat here is if you go in with a heavy hand and you emphasize discipline, you're going to get pushback. Emphasize safety, and you get a lot farther.
Excellent point, Dale. And my brain goes back to about 25 years ago. I got invited into a major private ambulance company, and they were equipping their entire fleet with GPS. And we were talking. I said, what's the goal of the GPS technology? And for all you executives and managers and supervisors who are watching this, you might want to write this down. This is a very successful private ambulance company. What's the goal of the GPS? Our shift supervisors are going to review them every day at the end of shift to catch our people doing something right, And they had the G forces and the acceleration and the braking loads and the turning loads and all of those things. And they rewarded people for doing things right. Not the focus today. But the number one complaint I get from public safety people around the world is the only time I hear from my boss is when something's wrong. And I guarantee you that in all aspects of public safety, the vast majority of things your people are doing, they are doing right. When you see people doing things right, catch them doing something right, ratify the good behavior, encourage the future good behavior. That's point number one. But when I was reading these questions about unintended consequences, I was cracking up because I looked up unintended consequences in the online and stole a couple stories there. Number one, prohibition. Prohibition back in the late 1920 and 1933 intended to curb alcohol consumption. It instead fueled organized crime and illegal bootlegging operation. And as I read that, I'm fast forwarding to 1968. In 1968, President Nixon had a choice. Do we go after the supply of drugs or do we go after the demand for drugs? And again, they hit the supply side. And what a lot of people fail to recognize, as long as there's a demand, there'll always be a supply. And our attack on the supply side, what has it created? The cartels and all of these murders and these deaths and these mega billion-dollar operations out there. The unintended consequences are really, really important. DDT. When I read this online, when I was a kid, our family had a ranch in Northern California, and I would spend my summer, 1 month of summer, up with my grandmother, and she had a sack of grain coated with DDT that I walked around and put down all the gopher holes and the holes that are on the ranch. And so the exposure to DDT, and now we find out that it was initially created for its effectiveness against pests. DDT's environmental impact led to severe ecological damages and health issues, prompting bans worldwide. Which brings back Dale's point, slow down and talk to people. Your black swan is somebody else's gray rhino. Just because it's new to you doesn't mean it's new to our profession. Doesn't mean it's new to your agency. Slowing down, talking to people, as Art said, getting everybody involved. Those are all key issues, all key issues. The unintended consequences of cell phones. Oh yeah, we now got cell phones. Well, I'll carry this phone and I'll use it for department business. And anytime I use the phone, I'll bill the department for those minutes. Oh, yeah. Okay, right. And the second a plaintiff lawyer finds out that you use your cell phone for department business, now your cell phone is open for everyone to look at. There's got to be that clear separation. It took about 10 years. And Bruce Prayett, my partner, and perhaps the best police defense lawyer in America today, Bruce Prayett was advocating that from day one. These have got to be separate, got to be separate. And people didn't get it until there was really huge consequences came about. Let's move on to our third item here. Can you share an example where technology decision went wrong, either in your agency or one you observed, and what lessons can be learned from that experience where a technology went really, really, really bad? I'll start with you on this one, Scott, if you don't mind.
Yeah, you bet. I think as we've talked about, technology is just amazing. And I want to just step back and, what Art said, I think is spot on, where we're putting smartphones in officers' hands. I think that's one of the most powerful things that an agency can do from a force multiplier. So I just wanted to touch on that because I think it's so important in today's age that understand that. As far as technology that's gone bad, there's two things that come to mind. Some of you may know that I'm involved in a program called Below 100, a program to try to reduce law enforcement deaths to a number below 100. I've been involved in that for a number of years. And one of the technology cases that I use is a sergeant out of Vermont that is traveling down the road at over the speed limit, watching a Netflix video on his in-car MDC as he's speeding down the road and runs over and kills a pedestrian. And we see this all too often where officers are taking technology or they're not paying attention and it ends in disastrous consequences. I call that complacency, where my guess is that sergeant or that officer has done that many times before, and then all of a sudden it ends in disastrous consequences. So I think on that case, it's important that we have good policy, we have good training, and we make sure that our are following it when it comes to technology, so it doesn't end in disaster. I think the second thing that is going to become more and more of a problem is the use of AI. So artificial intelligence, many of us are using that for research. We're using that to write reports, and I do a lot of expert witness work, and one of the attorneys that I'm working with on the other side used AI to draft his report, his rebuttal to this case, and AI hallucinated and brought in several different cases that had nothing to do with what we were talking about, and he didn't realize that, and the judge actually found that out, and it didn't fare very well for him. So I would just say that AI, if we're going to use it, we need to make sure that we're using it properly, that we understand that it can provide misinformation. It sometimes has some credibility issues, and that we have good policy about how we use it and when we don't use it, so it doesn't embarrass us or cause problems in the law enforcement field. We need to make sure that we have good human oversight that is critical when we're using AI. So those are the two examples that I would use.
Thanks, Scott. Dale, back to you if you're still there. Would you please relate the story you told me to our audience today about how you asked artificial intelligence, I believe it was one of the major ones, to compare one state versus another state in line of duty deaths and the results of that?
Oh, yes, that's a great question, Gordon. It's really relevant to what Scott was talking about. I became aware that one state, Georgia, was experiencing significantly higher losses than a state of similar size and population, and that was Michigan. And then looking and exploring all the variables in this, trying to identify something that from the below 100 side, we could educate people, inform, maybe make some course corrections to actually result in lives being saved. And I hit on ChatGPT and thought, this is great because it can analyze all these different variables and give me some type of reasoned information I could act on. So I went back 20 years and ask it to do a year-by-year comparison and draw some conclusions and summarize. Well, it did a great job. It was the most impressive document ever. But then I started looking at it and it just didn't ring true with the numbers that I knew to be actual. So I did a series of questions trying to pin it down, and I had to ask it 3 times before I actually got an actual meaningful response in terms of the source of this information. And it finally said, the numbers you're looking for do not exist in any form that I can calculate. Therefore, I put forward estimated numbers. In other words, it made the friggin' stuff up. It just made it up. But it wrote the document in such a way, it was so incredibly compelling. And I had an opportunity afterwards, because of a committee I'm on with ICP, the CGIS committee. I shared this because I said, here's what's happening in your agencies. You've got support personnel that are challenged to get their work done, and you give them an assignment, and that demographic is such, they're going to embrace this. They're going to plug in that question. They're going to give you a really impressive document. And you know what? You may be asking for a federal grant based on information that was, quote, made up, or as Scott said, hallucinated by AI. You got to be careful with this stuff.
Art, I'm sure you tie into something that you're familiar with all your experience.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on a controversial one. And that's facial rec technology. I will say, trying to leave out my own opinion, it's something, and as we talked about, the technology you roll out and how do you do that, carefully, intelligently. But I think that's one technology where you're seeing this across the country. It pops up, someone wants to utilize it, someone wants to, use it and push it forward. But then you've got public outcry, right? A lot of challenges around that technology. But where I see it successful is where people have good policy. And that's something where I don't think anybody really harps on the importance of policy from a policing standpoint. I think a lot of us are used to, the police policy or the computer policy, right? That says, I won't shop online using my work computer. Well, we all know that someone has taken 5 minutes out of their day and shopped for a new phone, a new, pair of pants, shoes, whatever, right? Everyone hears policy and that's what they think in their head. But I will say, from a policing standpoint, I have never seen technology been better guided by a strong policy. And I think that's, again, where a lot of the rollouts in facial recognition start to fail and have challenges, is because there's no policy, and the explaining of policy and the importance of policy from a law enforcement perspective, it really leaves a lot of people to just wander, that they're walking down the streets, you're running facial technology and, you're looking up Art Thompson and seeing, where was he the last 4 hours and what was he shopping? What was he buying? This guy's going to commit a crime. That's not how it's used. But people don't believe you until you get to that policy stage. You start to outline policy procedure and show kind of that transparency. I think it changes. So I will say some of the hardest technology to roll out is that controversial technology piece, being facial recognition. I've seen challenges in San Francisco. I had a lot of challenges where we had the ACLU come in person and, stand up against it. But I will say that, it's the controversial tech that makes it hard. But I definitely think that there's opportunity to inform the public, inform use cases, and get some of those things across the finish line, for sure.
Thank you for that, Art. With respect to policy development, Professor Wucker and I in our class, we talk about identifying the real risks you face, and do you have sufficient control measures, policies, procedures to address the risks? And if you don't have those policies in place, the technique that we ask people to use, I developed this, it's called 5-4-3-2-1-0. If you want to build a policy around body-worn cameras or artificial intelligence or unmanned uncrewed aerial systems, give me 5 people who actually have to use the technology, the bottom line users. Give me 4 supervisors, 3 managers, 2 executives, 1 risk manager, and this is very controversial, 0 lawyers. Keep the lawyers out of the derivation process, allow them to review it and make changes when it's done. But if you get a lawyer involved, they get paid by the hour, and this project can end up lasting for years. But developing the policy with the input of all the people who will be involved in it. And when you do that, you'll get buy-in at a much faster rate from your personnel when they know, you know what, we had some input in building this policy, so that's all good for everybody. The second thought is both Dale and Scott have talked about below 100. A quick pitch on below 100. It's back. Please pay attention to what's going on. Way back in 2010, Dale Stockton, along with some other very, very smart people, put together this idea called below 100. What risk strategies can we put into place to reduce the line of duty death total in American law enforcement to a number below 100? Wear your vest, watch your speed, wear your belt, what's important now, and complacency kills. And gradually over a period of time, the line of duty deaths will creep down. Guess what? 2025 could be the first year where we actually achieve that goal of below 100. So please take that one seriously. One final thought. When I was brand new in 1973, I was first in a patrol car. and we had to inspect the trunk to make sure it had the adequate flares and the water and the death blanket and all those different types of things. And I would open up the trunk on some of these cars, and there was a hole in the trunk of the car. You could see the pavement through the trunk of the car. Not all cars, but the older ones had a hole in there. And I'm very inquisitive on things. Why? This is not like a jab where somebody made a mistake. This is a hole. Somebody cut this out perfectly. And so I asked around, nobody knew. I finally found one old guy, and he said, "Oh, yeah, that was from the Olin flare dropper." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Have you ever laid flares on a freeway?" Laying flares on a freeway at midnight is one of the scariest things you will ever do, especially an elevated freeway. When big rigs go by, the whole roadway shakes, and people are passing on each side. I remember the first time I was just throwing flares out at random. I was scared to death, scared to death. Apparently in 1971, somebody in the CHP had a brilliant idea. The Olin Flare Corporation developed a device that would be in your trunk. It looked like a huge Gatling gun, and you could activate it from your dashboard, and it would drop flares as you drove along and lay the flare pattern for you. Sounds brilliant. I said, "Well, why'd they stop it?" He said, "After 5 cars burned up where the flare dropped inside the trunk, they gave it up." And I said, "Interesting." Well, guess what? That was discontinued. As I traveled around the country later on, I learned that many other agencies had used the Olin flare dropper after the CHP experiences and had similar experiences. And wow, who would have ever thunk? Again, your black swan is somebody else's gray rhino. Just because it's new to you does not mean it's new to our profession. We've got to talk to people, share information, get together with people. What are your experiences with this? And ask those questions proactively. One final issue here we'd like to talk about. What practical steps should decision makers use to avoid being swayed by hype and make technology choices that are most likely to improve capabilities and increase employee safety? Art, I'll turn this one over to you. Do you have any ideas in that realm?
Too many. I think to start, the biggest thing is to survey the field, right? You hit it on the head. Everyone comes to these large events and everyone has a solution that can solve all of your problems. Well, one shop that solution, right? There's usually one that says they can do it all. That means there's at least 5 more that can say they can do it all. And what you have to find in your technology pathway is find the technologies that fits your organization best. And a lot of times that means for adoption of new tech, it means to actually change your practices to fit within technology, right? Technology is designed around a use case, not designed around one agency. So if your agency isn't able to make the desired changes or flex as far as how they operate, the technology is not going to work and it's not going to be able to be scaled or deployed to the model that you want. So I think you have to shop and you have to take other people's recommendations. Don't take those for granted. What each department goes through can be relatable no matter the size or scale. So I think one, check references. Talk to your peers. That's where most of the great ideas come from, is learning from each other's lessons. But those 2 things I think are just huge and very invaluable and can really help gear you towards better success with the use of technology.
Thanks, Art. Dale, any thoughts?
Well, I'll give you a couple of stories from the past. I'll be brief on these, Gordon, but I remember when we were implementing a new CAD system, and at the time we did not have any computers in the cars. That was the whole point with this new CAD, was to get computers in the cars. And so we had a decision to make in terms of displays. Now, this was in the early days of these in-car computers, and everybody was using this claim called nit. How bright is the screen? And a nit is this anomalous kind of that nobody could really define for you what it was. And there were these claims. I remember specifically a vendor came to the department and they had this display. They brought it into the conference room and they showed it proudly to us. And I said, okay, so what's it look like in daylight? Because officers are out there in the field and they stand outside the car and they're trying to look in and see what the return is. And the guy says, well, it has X number of nits, so it should work fine. So I said, okay, we're going to get an extension cord. We're going to roll your display outside so we can look at it. His face dropped big time in terms of the reaction of that extension cord. But we did that for every vendor that came. We took whatever demo they provided and we took it outside to see what it really looked like and work like in the daylight. And then when we chose a vendor and it came time for training, keep in mind, again, this is the early days, but setups and use of computers are very different than sitting at a desk. But the training program they had was bringing officers in from the field, rotating them through, and they'd sit down and they'd sit at the desktop and they would learn how to use the in-car system. Well, that didn't set well with the IT manager and I, and we came up with this plan. We literally set up a drive-in move type experience at the back of the station with a projector shining the display on the side of the building and patrol cars lined up facing the screens.
I think we lost Dale there. I apologize for that. Scott, is Dale back?
I'm-
Scott, can you?
The last thing, I'll let you go with it, Gordon. You go ahead. I don't want to
No,
mess it
go
up with
ahead.
this connection.
Go ahead, Dale. You're live. Just continue.
Okay. All right. Did you hear the part about the display on the back side of the building?
Yes.
Okay. So what the takeaway there was, put your people in the environment, test the technology in the way that it's going to be used. Don't sit in some conference room and make a decision about technology. Put it out in the field. If you have to, have a test group to put it through spaces, but you've got to do real world testing with this stuff.
Scott, I see you smiling as Dale was talking. I know you've got something you want to say.
Yeah, just a handful of things. I speak from experience, and not all of it is good. I've had a lot of these kind of things fall apart, and so the things that are important, I think, is first of all, you have to define the problem first. Don't shop for solutions before needs. When you're at that big conference and some vendor says, "Hey, we've got this new software," do your staff a favor. Make sure that you've got a problem that it's going to address. Don't just bring in a piece of technology because it's the latest and greatest. I've been guilty of that, and it can end in undermining your credibility with your organization. If you do find a piece of technology that you do need, when you implement it, build a diverse team. As Gordon said, he had his 5 to 0. Include your frontline staff. Get the officers involved in it and let them help bring this program to fruition. I'm a strong believer in what I call super users. Find those officers in your organization who are tech savvy, who love technology, who have smartphones. Bring them into the program and put them, hopefully you have them on every shift, day shift, swing shift, night shift, to where when there's a problem during the implementation, you have super users there that can provide assistance. There's nothing worse than implementing a piece of technology and it doesn't work for the graveyard staff and there's no one there to help them handle that. So make sure you build a diverse team when you're deploying any kind of technology, and think outside the box. Include IT, include your finance department, include your frontline staff, include supervisors. Number 3, build or pilot and field test first. Don't just roll out a program. Don't rely on vendors, what they say, like as I mentioned, that word vaporware. Make sure that you pilot test it, you field test it, and make sure it's going to work for your organization. Number 4, check sustainability, making sure that you can afford it. A lot of officers or a lot of agencies implemented body-worn cameras, and then they found out how much the storage was going to be, and the program many times ended in disaster because it was so expensive to roll it out and to store those videos, and they hadn't thought about the long-term cost. You might get a grant to implement a piece of technology, but what happens when that technology wears out and you have to replace it? Make sure that you've got a good sustainability program in place to be able to upgrade and replace that. Number 5, make sure that it's tied to your mission. Make sure that the technology, makes sense. Art talked about facial recognition. There's a lot of that technology. Some agencies, that's good. Some agencies, facial recognition doesn't make sense for them. And then the last thing I just want to say is make sure that you audit your program. Body-worn camera is a perfect example of that. We've implemented body-worn cameras some 15, 20 years ago, and now we've got a database of our culture sitting there with body-worn cameras. Take a look at that. Again, not to get officers in trouble, but like Gordon said, find where your officers are doing great things and recognize that, and make sure that you're, as you review those body-worn camera videos, that you're doing what you said you would do. Because I see so many times in the expert witness work that I do that sometimes there is a culture of the organization on video, but it's not necessarily a good one. And so it's a plethora of information for a plaintiff's attorney to come in and show that you knew or you should have known that something was going on and you had it all on video and you didn't take the time to review it. And again, I'm not talking about getting officers in trouble. I'm just talking about reviewing it and using it for training purposes, using it for that hand on the shoulder discussion to say, hey, we need to look at these areas in some ways that we can improve to make sure we keep you out of trouble, officer, and us as the agency out of trouble as well.
Thanks, Scott. Art, I know you got some thoughts on this.
Oh, I think that everyone hit the good points. As you look to just adopt more and roll out more technology again, I don't think there's any wrong door when you start to talk about collaborating, pulling people together, and focusing on how this will work best for the organization. So, as you look to deploy new things and use technology, don't, like Scott said, don't just get the bloatware, the vaporware. I'm sorry, you said vaporware. Don't get the vaporware. Make sure you get something that's going to work within your organization. And I think bringing in procurement early, if you're in my city, boy, oh boy, is that the smartest move you can make. You want to avoid any challenges and barriers with that. So, again, I think be collaborative, be open, but more or less, be able to talk to other people and be able to build that coalition because body cams, it's funny because Scott alluded to when we rolled out, he rolled out body cams way before we did, but when we rolled them out, I will never forget, I had an officer, I'm 6'2", just shy. This officer had to be 6'6", 6'7", one of the two, and I'm 185 pounds. This guy had to have been 240 of pure muscle. And he walked up to me and said, "This thing's heavy." And I will never forget the look on his face. I could not believe that this guy who looked like the Hulk was whining about a little square body camera. But, you start to talk about, your troops, your force. And if they don't believe in the technology, they don't believe in that rollout, they will make excuses as silly as they may be to get out of them, to not to use it, to not deploy the technology. And it's not because, they hate technology or they just want to fight back. Change is scary. And I think we often forget that technology is pushing rapid change. And so, getting the narrative on why you're deploying the technology, what it's used for, what it's needed for, that is just so critical and so huge. And so again, I think the transparency that we have to have with good technology is just robust, and it's necessary in order to have successful implementations.
Thanks, Art. Time for final thoughts. Dale, what message would you like to leave our audience with today? What is on your mind? Wow.
Boy, Gordon, you hit me up first with the most open-ended question. Let's see. What's first on my mind? Well, you know how I feel about below 100, and I would just say this. Don't overlook the safety aspect, both the benefit and the negative in terms of safety. How is this going to affect the safety of our folks? Because if you're going to have a fail, oftentimes it'll be because the troops in the field say, this is impacting officer safety. So what Scott said earlier about your user groups and getting your super users, champions that can show the benefit of the technology, can give you meaningful feedback and at the same time serve as trainers for that adoption with new people, that's priceless, and it'll help ensure the success of the project.
Thank you, Dale. Art, any closing comments?
I think don't be technology shy, and with that, I'm going to say, as I just alluded to, don't be transparency shy, right? There is a solution out there. There's a way to make things better for your organization, your officers. Stop. Right? Don't be afraid to look around and find what fits your organization best. Technology pushes change, and I think the best way we can do that is together. And so, technology is the future. It's not going anywhere. It's only going to push us more forward rapidly. So be open-minded and be curious.
Thank you, Art. Scott, can you wrap it up for us, please?
You bet. Thank you so much for the opportunity to participate today. I think this has been a great discussion. I think just my closing thoughts are tech is a great force multiplier, and we've seen how it has benefited agencies across the country. I would just encourage people to guard against hype. Think about long-term, the sustainability costs that we talked about, the human judgment first, making sure that technology doesn't replace good human decision making. And then I think with any technology is just to audit it. If I think about the sergeant in Vermont that was, watching the video on his MDC as he's driving down the road and he hits and kills someone. I think about if an audit was done and somebody saw that was happening throughout that officer's shift, and they were able to go and have sort of that hand on the shoulder discussion that, hey, we can't do that, and taking steps to prevent that, that would have changed everything for the agency, for the officer who's being criminally charged, and for the person who has been hit and killed. So I think auditing is an extremely important piece of any technology program that we do.
Thank you, Scott. Let me wrap it up with this. First of all, I want to thank the good people at UVA for sponsoring this. If you have those young women and men on your department who really want to make a difference, what I like to call the 5%ers, have them take a look at the Master of Public Safety program and the Center for Public Safety and Justice at University of Virginia, both brilliant operations. The primary mission of everyone in public safety is preservation of life. Not just length of life, but quality of life, not just for our citizens, but for our personnel. And I believe that technology has a huge role in maximizing that goal, taking care of our people, taking care of the great public who supports us. Let me wrap it up with the way I wrap up every program. There are 3 basic rules in risk management. Rule 1, there's no new ways to get in trouble. Rule 2, there's always a better way to stay out of trouble. And number 3, predictable is preventable. So thank you to the panelists. It was a great job, I think. Thank you for all you folks who watched this today. To all of you, good luck, good health, goodbye. God bless you. God bless America. And let's go back and work safely. Gordon Graham, signing off.
Thank you.